Hey everyone, Dr. Mujtaba Shaikh here from The Dentalist. Today we're going to start where we left from. Dental Material Sciences from McCabe. Chapter 2, the properties used to characterize dental materials. We were done with the introduction of this chapter, and today we're going to talk about the mechanical properties of the materials, which is the next topic inside this chapter. Now, before we dive into the mechanical properties, there are some definitions and terms that you need to familiarize yourself with. So let's start with that first. The mechanical properties of the materials are basically based on two phenomena: stress and strain. Let's first try to understand what stress in dental materials is. So you see, when an external force is applied to a body, a force equal in magnitude but opposite in direction is generated from the object or the body on which the external force is applied. This resistant force that comes inside from the body is called as stress. This was just an elaborative explanation of what stress really is. But if you look at a formal definition of it, it goes like this. When an external force is applied on the body, an internal force equal in magnitude and opposite in direction is set up. That force is called as stress. I hope the definition is now clear to you. Now there's another aspect that I want you to understand in stress. When the external force is applied on the body, it is applied at a certain area. So the stress generated will also be generated at that specific area where the external force is applied. Therefore, it is bound by the area parameter. So when we look at the formula of stress, it is the force per unit area. That means stress equals to F over A, where F is force and A is the area where the force is being acted upon. Now that you've understood what stress really is, you must also know that there are three different types of stress. Compressive stress is the stress resisting a compressive force. So when there is a compressive force acting on the body, the stress produced in result of it is going to be compressive stress. The second type of stress is called as the tensile stress. Now, tensile stress is produced when there is a tensile force acting on the body. Tensile force can also be called as a stretching force. You see, when I put tensile force on the body, there's an internal stress that is produced, which is called the tensile stress. I hope this is clear to you now. Let's move on. Now, the third basic type of stress is called as the shear stress. Shear stress, as the word indicates, is produced from what? The shear force. Shear force is the functional gliding force, or the frictional force, or the sliding force. These are some other names that would help you understand what shear force is. So when a shear force is applied on the body, it results in shear stress. Now you need to understand that inside our mouth, a combination of all these three stresses is going on. So when we bite for chewing like that, what happens is there's compressive force acting on it. Then there's tensile force through which we tear the food. Then there is functional gliding force through which we grind the food. Combination of these three types of stress is basically going on inside our oral cavity. And this is why the dental materials are evaluated for its mechanical properties on the basis of these three types of stresses. Because if they're not able to bear these three types of stresses, then how will they survive in the oral cavity? Is it clear to you now? Let's move on then. The unit of stress is called as Pascal. Now, if we go back to the physics that we studied back in college, you will remember how we used to derive the formula for units. Now, we need to understand where Pascal is coming from. When we look at the formula of stress, it is stress equals to force per unit area. Now, if you look at the unit of force, what is it? Force is Newton, and the unit of area is square meter. So when we put Newton per square meter, it is equal to Pascal. I hope you've got the concept of how Pascal is the unit of stress. You need to know this derivation, okay? Moving on. Now let's look at some laboratory tests that are performed on the dental material to evaluate the amount of stress it can bear. The most common test is the 3-point bending test. So So how this three-point bending test works is the object is placed on two supports at the end. Now the force is applied from the center of these 2 points. So basically when the force is applied, the object is bent from 3 points, 1, 2, and 3. And when the force is applied on this point, the object goes through what? Compressive stress. Then since it's bending, it goes through tensile stress. Therefore the object tends to move in this direction, and the product is then also going through the gliding force. This is called as the three-point bending test, which helps us evaluate the product for all the 3 types of stress. Numerically, this can be shown as stress equals to 3FL over 2BD square, where 3 is the assumed magnitude of the force, L is the distance between the supports, and B is the width of the specimen, and D is the depth of the specimen. Now don't be scared of these tests when they're shown numerically in the book. They're just there to show you how stress is calculated, nothing else. You don't have to memorize all that. Just understand the concept. Now let's look at another test which is used to evaluate the tensile stress of a brittle material. It is called as a diametral compressive tensile test. In this test, a cylinder of brittle material is compressed across its diameter to evaluate the compressive and tensile forces on it. So you see the value of stress is given in the book as stress equals to 2F over pi dt, where 2 is the magnitude of the force, pi is used to describe the area since it's a cylindrical shaped material, and d is the diameter of the cylinder, t is the length of the cylinder. I'm repeating again, all these numerical values are not to be crammed. They're just for your understanding. They're just for you to learn how these materials go through lab tests, and then they're evaluated on paper to bring it into books and research materials. Just understand these concepts in a way that even if they give you these examples in the exam, you know what these things stand for. You have a clear concept of what 2 is doing before the F, and why pi is over there, and what D or T could stand for. Okay? That's the whole point of discussing these examples in the video. Now, another interesting concept that I want you to understand is if for the same test, a non-brittle material or a ductile material is used, what will happen? The ductile material will have no brittleness. It will not produce any kind of opposing force. So that means under force, it does not produce any stress. Therefore, a thing to remember is if a diametral compressive tensile test is done on what? On a ductile material or a non-brittle material, the numerical value would be 0, since there's no opposing force or stress produced by the body. Now we'll discuss some quick short concepts that I want you to understand. We'll first talk about the term strength. Strength is the maximum stress that the material can bear. After that, the material either breaks or it loses its form. This is what was happening with the glass. It was reaching its maximum stress or strength, and after that it was breaking. Okay? So you have the concept of strength very clear, that it is what? It is the maximum stress that a body can bear. It means that if a material is placed under a force more than its strength, the material may fracture. So strength is also called as fracture stress in some areas, and you know the reason why it's called that. So don't be confused when you see terms strength, maximum stress, or fracture stress. All of these things mean the same. Now similarly, how we talked about stress, if the strength is evaluated from the stretching aspect, it is going to be called as tensile strength. If there's compressive force on it, it's going to be called as compressive strength. And then in the same way, there's shear strength. Now there's another terminology that often confuses students, which is called as flexural stress. Flexural stress is simply a form of tensile stress, which is produced when the product goes through tensile forces, and due to tensile forces, the product is being bent. Now this force is going to be called as flexural stress that helps the material bend. Okay? Is it clear? So the stress that is produced while bending is a form of tensile stress, but it is called as a flexural stress. So whenever you hear the word bending force or bending stress, you will understand that it is what? Flexural stress. Flexural bending. Okay? Just related with that. So the maximum flexural stress would be called as what? Maximum flexural stress would be called as what? Flexural strength. Okay? You know that now. You know how to play with these words now. Good. Flexural strength may be influenced by various factors like surface defects, voids, imperfections, which produce stress concentrations in the material. These stress concentrations may cause the material to fracture at a force lower than expected. This is why when we see a material giving unusual performance at the clinic, we doubt that it could have surface defects, voids, imperfections. And that is why it has fractured in the oral cavity or is not performing well when we're working on it. I know it was a long lecture, but it was only to clear out your concepts. So let's just quickly summarize what we went through today. So we talked about the definition of stress, types of stress, numerical representation of stress, unit of stress and how it is derived. Then we talked about the 2 lab tests to evaluate the material for stress. The first one was the 3-point bending test. The second one was the diametral compressive tensile test. Then we talked about the concepts like strength, fracture stress, and flexural strength. I would suggest you to go through this video a couple more times and note down the important points. So when you're reviewing all of it, you will have everything in handy. After that, I would like you to go through the description of this video and look for the link for the quiz of this topic. Solve that, practice that, and evaluate yourself of how much you have learned from it. If there's any confusion, just feel free to comment down below, or if you have any suggestions or feedback, just feel free to write that down too. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like us on our Facebook. We'll see you next week.